The wind howled across the dry plains, rattling the shutters of the homestead like a restless ghost. Clara Booth stood at the edge of the porch, her fingers gripping the rough-hewn railing as she stared across the barren fields. The cattle grazed listlessly in the distance, their low moans mingling with the creak of the windmill. It was early morning, and the rising sun cast long shadows over the dust-choked soil, highlighting the harshness of a life that had never been gentle to her. Clara, breakfast's getting cold. Her mother's voice pierced the morning air, sharp and accusing. Carrying with it years of judgment, Clara sighed, turning back toward the cabin. Her mother, Martha Booth, had long since stopped pretending she saw Clara as anything other than a disappointment. In a town where women were measured by their ability to marry and bear children, Clara had failed the test. For 23 years, she had endured whispered words, cutting glances, and the scornful laughter of neighbors when they passed by the homestead. Barren, they called her. Not a woman, not a wife, just barren. She set the wicker basket on the rough wooden table, where her father, silent and stooped from years of hard labor, sat polishing his boots. His eyes flicked toward her, devoid of warmth, but weighed down with an unspoken resignation. Clara had grown accustomed to their disappointment, learning early that family could wound deeper than any stranger. After breakfast, she stepped outside again, letting the wind whip through her hair, tangling it in a way that matched the chaos in her mind. The homestead stretched in all directions, a modest claim in a country that was unforgiving and vast. She loved the land, its endless horizon, the freedom in the wide-open plains, but the people, they suffocated her. Every interaction carried a sting. Every passing glance reminded her of what she Clara had dreamed of leaving since she was old enough to know the difference between dreams and reality. She had wanted adventure, wanted the smell of leather, the pounding of hooves, the sound of honest laughter. She wanted a life that didn't revolve around the cruel whisperings of a family who couldn't see her worth. Her younger brother, Tom, kicked a stone down the dusty path. "You're still here. Why don't you just leave, Clara?" he asked, more curiosity than cruelty in his voice. He had always been closer to her in spirit than to their mother or father, though he feared the consequences of speaking up too loudly. "Where would I go?" Clara replied quietly, staring at the horizon. The plains seemed endless. Yet she knew that freedom required more than dreaming. It required courage she wasn't sure she yet had. By midday, she saddled her horse, a gray mare named Dusty, and rode toward the northern ridge. Riding always cleared her mind, offering a sense of control she lacked in the cabin. The wind tore at her clothes and hair, but she welcomed it, a reminder that she still had the power to choose her path. She paused atop the ridge and looked down into the valley below. There, the neighboring ranches sprawled like scattered jewels on the earth, dotted with cattle and dust clouds from long trails. For a moment, Clara imagined herself in one of those cabins, a place where she was wanted, respected, and not whispered about behind her back. The sun climbed higher, burning the horizon, and with it, something in Clara shifted. She would not let her family's words define her any longer. The word barren would not follow her beyond this ridge, beyond this valley, beyond this life. She would find a place where she belonged, where someone could see her worth beyond her ability to conform to some narrow expectation. As she rode back toward the homestead, a determination settled over her like a second skin. The wind had carried away some of the lingering fear. Soon, she told herself, she would leave this place, step beyond the suffocating judgment, and carve out a life that was truly hers. Unseen in the far distance, a dust cloud marked the approach of a rider on the horizon. Clara squinted against the sun, curiosity stirring alongside her newfound resolve. For the first time in years, the thought of meeting someone unknown, someone untainted by the whispers of her family, brought a spark of hope. The plains were vast. Her future was hers to claim, and somewhere beyond the ridge, she would find the life she had been dreaming of, even if it meant leaving everything familiar behind. The sun was high in the sky when the dust cloud appeared on the horizon, a solitary figure bouncing along the ridge trail. Clara tightened her grip on Dusty's reins, squinting against the glare. Whoever it was rode with purpose, not the lazy amble of a passing neighbor. Her curiosity, already heightened by the emptiness of the plains, pricked at her. As the rider drew closer, she saw he was a man, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that shaded a face lined by both sun and sorrow. His horse, a dark bay stallion, moved steadily but with an anxious energy, ears twitching to every sound of the prairie. He carried the air of a man who had seen more loss than comfort, a man who'd wrestled with life and emerged tempered, though not yet hardened. When he reached the base of the ridge, Clara slowed Dusty and studied him. "Morning," she called out. The man tipped his hat slightly, his eyes scanning her with a mixture of caution and polite curiosity. "Morning, ma'am," he replied. His voice was low, steady, carrying the kind of weariness that spoke of long nights spent alone in the dark. "Name's Jack. Jack Callahan." Clara nodded. "Clara Booth, you from around here?" Jack shook his head. "Not really. Came to see if I could find work or, truth be told, a place to make a life. Lost my wife last year. Been trying to keep the ranch together, but it's been rough." He paused, glancing over the valley. "I hear this part of the country's good land, even if it's lonely." Clara studied him. There was a sadness there, but also something steadier. A quiet resolve she recognized in herself. "It is," she said. "Plenty of land. Hard work though." He nodded. "Hard work's what I do best." There was a hint of humor in the corners of his mouth, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He reined his horse closer, revealing the worn leather saddlebags and the faint traces of travel dust clinging to his coat. "Say, ma'am, if you don't mind, could you help a man with a broken wheel? My wagon's taken a turn for the worse, just up the trail." Clara felt a twinge of excitement, opportunity, challenge, connection. She dismounted and tied Dusty to a nearby post. "I reckon I can manage that," she said, brushing the dust from her sleeves. Together, they worked to lift the wagon and replace the broken wheel. The sun bore down, sweat ran freely, and the silence between them was punctuated only by the occasional grunt or the scrape of wood on dirt. Yet, in that silence, something began to grow: mutual respect. Jack appreciated Clara's determination, her strength, her hands that, despite being calloused, moved with surprising skill. Clara, in turn, saw in Jack a man who bore his pain quietly, without complaint, yet carried a sense of honor and integrity rare in these parts. When the wagon was finally fixed, Jack leaned against the wooden frame, brushing dust from his coat. "I didn't expect someone to be so capable. Most folks around here would have just watched me curse the wagon all morning." He looked at her squarely, eyes searching. "I appreciate it." Clara shrugged, attempting casual indifference, but the corners of her mouth betrayed her pride. "It's not like I had anything better to do." Jack laughed, a low, warm sound that seemed almost out of place in the vast emptiness around them. "Well, ma'am, if you're free later, maybe you can show me the lay of the land. I'll be needing all the help I can get keeping this ranch running." Clara hesitated, a flutter in her chest she hadn't felt in years. "I reckon I could do that," she said finally, "though I warn you, it's not a short ride, and I don't give directions lightly." "Fair enough," Jack said with a grin, tipping his hat again. "Fair enough." As he rode off toward the ranch, Clara felt a strange stirring of hope. The kind that prickled in her chest and made the wind feel different, somehow not harsh, but promising. The loneliness that had weighed on her for so long, the whispers of barren from her family, seemed to recede, if only slightly. Perhaps there was a place in this wide, unforgiving land for her yet. Perhaps someone could see her worth for what it truly was, not for what she was expected to be. Dusty shifted beneath her, impatient. Clara patted the mare's neck, her eyes following Jack until the dust cloud swallowed him again. The plains stretched out before her, vast and wild, and for the first time in years, Clara felt the thrill of possibility. The horizon wasn't just a boundary, it was an invitation. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Clara found herself riding alongside Jack Callahan toward the northern pasture. Dusty's hooves kicked up the dry earth as the stallion beside her moved with purposeful strides. Jack had insisted she help check the northern fence line before the cattle were rounded in for the day. Clara, though still cautious, felt a strange thrill in following his lead. There was something steady about him, a quiet confidence that made her feel safer than she had in years. "Most folks around here wouldn't bother with the fence until the weekend," Clara said, shading her eyes against the glare. "Why the rush?" Jack glanced at her, his expression unreadable behind the shadow of his hat. "Last night, I heard some rustlers were moving through the valley. Could be nothing, could be trouble. I'd rather check before it becomes a problem." Clara nodded. Rustlers were no idle threat on these plains. She had heard stories from her neighbors, men riding under the cover of night, stealing cattle, threatening families who couldn't fight back. The thought tightened her chest, but she kept her grip firm on Dusty's reins. "I can handle a fence line," she said, "and a few rustlers, if it comes to that." Jack's lips twitched into a faint grin. "Good. I like a woman who can handle herself." The wind picked up as they rode, carrying with it the scent of dry grass and distant smoke. Clara's thoughts drifted to her family, and she felt the familiar sting of resentment. If only they could see her now, a helpless girl, but a woman riding the plains, confronting danger with her own hands. The word barren echoed faintly in her mind, but it was losing power. Here, in the open land, her worth was measured by skill, courage, and grit. They reached the northern fence just as the first cattle began to stir. A low mooing carried across the plains, and Clara's heart leaped as she saw a small group of calves near the broken section of the fence. A section of timber had snapped in the wind, leaving a gap wide enough for the cattle to escape. Jack spurred his horse closer, assessing the damage. "We need to fix this before the herd scatters. I'll hold them back, make sure they don't stampede. You patch the fence." Clara dismounted and tied Dusty to a post, her hands working quickly to secure the loose boards. Jack's horse snorted beside her, impatient, but he ignored it, keeping the cattle at bay. Clara felt the strain in her arms, the heat on her skin, but she refused to falter. Each nail she drove, each board she replaced, felt like a declaration. She would not be underestimated. Suddenly, a commotion broke out. A stray calf had panicked, running straight toward the gap in the fence. Jack reacted instantly, swinging his lasso with precise skill and rounding the animal back into the herd. "You okay?" he called over the wind. "I'm fine," Clara shouted, heart pounding. But inside, a rush of adrenaline made her pulse race. She realized something that had been simmering for years. She craved challenges like this. A life dictated by fear and judgment had never suited her. Here, she was alive. Here, she mattered. They worked side by side for the better part of an hour, corralling the herd and repairing the fence. Sweat coated their faces, and the dust clung to their clothes like a second skin. Jack glanced at her occasionally, and each time his gaze lingered a fraction longer than necessary. Clara felt an unfamiliar warmth stir in her chest, a combination of pride, respect, and something else she wasn't ready to name. When the last board was finally secured, they stepped back, surveying their work. The fence was sturdy, the cattle contained, and the morning sun cast a golden glow over the plains. Clara leaned against the fence, breathing hard but smiling. "Not bad for a morning's work," she said, her voice lighter than it had been in years. Jack nodded, admiration in his eyes. "You're tougher than most men I know. Reckon you could have handled it all on your own." He tipped his hat, though the faint smile on his lips betrayed his awe. "I'm glad you were here." For a moment, neither spoke, just standing in the quiet aftermath of labor, listening to the wind whisper across the prairie. Clara felt a connection not just to the land, but to this man who saw her not as barren or broken, but as capable, valuable, and strong. As they mounted their horses to return to the ranch, Clara felt a small, stubborn hope take root. Perhaps this was the beginning of something she had never dared imagine, a life where her worth was measured by her heart and hands, not by what she could or could not give her family. And as Jack rode beside her, she realized that for the first time, she wasn't alone. The evening sun burned low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains. Clara rode back toward the homestead, Dusty's hooves pounding a steady rhythm against the parched earth. Her mind replayed the morning's work with Jack, the thrill of the cattle, the satisfaction of mending the fence. But as she neared the cabin, a familiar unease crept over her. The air of her family's judgment was inescapable, thick as the dust clinging to her boots. "Clara?" Her mother's sharp voice sliced through the quiet. Martha Booth stood on the porch, hands on hips, eyes narrowed in disapproval. "Where have you been all day?" And with him, no less. Clara dismounted, bracing herself. "I was helping Jack with his fence. The cattle were loose." "Helping Jack?" Martha's voice rose. "That man is no one for you. You're still young, and he's a widower. You know what people will say?" Clara felt the familiar heat of anger rise in her chest. "And what will they say, Mother? That I'm strong enough to work, smart enough to handle myself, and not afraid of hard work. That I might actually have a life beyond these four walls." Her father shifted uncomfortably, eyes cast downward, not meeting hers. Clara had long learned to read his silence, agreement without confrontation, but her mother's eyes burned into her, unwavering. "You're still barren." Martha spat the word like venom. "No man wants a woman who can't give him children. And don't think I don't see the way you've thrown yourself at that Callahan man. You'll regret it, mark my words." Clara clenched her jaw. The word barren had haunted her for years, but now, standing on the threshold of possibility, it felt less like a verdict and more like a challenge. "I don't care what he or you. I'm done living by your expectations. I'll find my own path." Her mother's lips trembled in fury, but before she could respond, the sound of hooves echoed across the yard. Jack rode into the homestead dust-coated and serious, yet carrying a quiet dignity. He stopped his horse a few feet from Clara and dismounted with practiced ease. "Evening, Mrs. Booth," he said, tipping his hat. I hope I'm not intruding. Martha's glare could have cut through steel. You are, she said coldly, and I don't approve of the company my daughter keeps. Jack's eyes, steady and unwavering, met hers. With all due respect, ma'am, I'm not here to take Clara from anyone. I'm just here because I need help with the ranch and I've found someone capable, honest, and trustworthy. That's all I ask. Clara's mother opened her mouth, but Jack raised a hand gently. I see you don't approve. That's fine, but I want to be clear about something. I don't care about children. I care about Clara. Her courage, her mind, her heart, that's what matters. The words struck Clara like a cool wind on a scorching day. Her chest tightened, and she felt a surge of emotion she hadn't allowed herself in years. For the first time, someone was looking at her truly, seeing her for who she was. Not what she lacked. But before relief could settle, Clara's mind shifted. Jack's own past, hinted at in quiet mentions of a lost wife, now seemed to weigh heavily in the air. I lost my wife last year, he had said once, voice low, almost apologetic. Had a boy, he didn't make it. He'd said no more, but Clara understood the depth of grief in those words. This man carried a shadow as real and sharp as the one she had carried all her life. That night, as the wind rattled the shutters and the prairie settled into darkness, Clara lay awake. She thought of Jack, his quiet resilience, the honesty in his eyes, and the pain he carried. And she thought of her family, their rigid expectations, their inability to see beyond her reproductive failure. She realized that life on the frontier demanded courage in every sense, facing storms, broken fences, and even the stubborn prejudices of family. And if she wanted a life that mattered, she couldn't shy away from the challenges, no matter how daunting. As the stars blanketed the sky, she made a decision. She would stand with Jack, shoulder the hardships of the land, and build a future where she was valued for herself, not for what she lacked. And if her family couldn't see her worth, that was their failing, not hers. The first whispers of dawn found her on the porch again, watching the prairie wake. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Jack's ranch waited, and with it, the possibility of life unburdened by judgment, rich with challenge, trust, and, perhaps, love. By mid-afternoon, the sky over the plains had darkened to an ominous gray, and the wind carried a chill that spoke of more than just autumn's approach. Clara and Jack rode out toward the western pasture, inspecting the water troughs and checking on the grazing herd. Dusty snorted and pawed at the earth, sensing the shift in the air, while Jack's stallion moved nervously beside her. Storm's coming, Jack said, his voice low but steady. We need to get back before it hits. Clara squinted at the horizon. Thick clouds were rolling in faster than expected, black and swollen with the promise of rain. Looks worse than a summer shower, she said. Maybe we should try rounding the cattle in before the wind blows them across the ridge. Jack nodded, the familiar intensity settling over him. Agreed. Let's move fast. The herd was scattered across the rolling hills, calves wandering dangerously close to the tree line. Clara spurred Dusty forward, signaling the cattle with sharp, practiced shouts. Jack mirrored her movements, his lasso twirling, corralling the strays with swift, precise motions. The first drops of rain spattered against her hat, then came the patter of steady rain, and the wind picked up, sending Dusty bucking slightly. This isn't just a storm, Clara yelled over the roar of the wind. It's a wall of trouble. Jack didn't hesitate. We've faced worse, he called back, his voice carrying over the thunder. Stick close, and follow my lead. The first calf bolted at the sound of thunder, running straight toward the barbed wire fence. Clara moved to intercept, urging Dusty faster, heart hammering in her chest. Jack was on the other side, swinging his lasso, his figure a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. Together, they managed to herd the frightened calf back to the center of the herd. Though the wind nearly tore Dusty from her grip, rain soaked them to the bone, plastering hair to their foreheads, chilling them to the marrow. Mud sucked at their boots, and the cattle were restless, frightened by the sudden flash of lightning. But through it all, Clara felt a fierce exhilaration, a surge of life she hadn't known in years. The storm was dangerous, yes, but it demanded courage, trust, and teamwork, the very things she craved. A sudden crack of lightning illuminated a section of the ridge, revealing a fallen tree blocking the trail back to the ranch. The wind howled around them, carrying shredded branches like missiles. Clara's pulse jumped. We'll have to go around, she shouted to Jack, who had already assessed the terrain. He nodded, eyes sharp. Follow me. Stay close to the cattle. Don't let them scatter. Together, they guided the herd through a narrow valley, the storm battering them from all sides. At one point, Dusty slipped on the slick grass, throwing Clara against the mare's neck. She bit back a cry of pain and scrambled back into the saddle, adrenaline keeping her moving. Jack's steady voice encouraged her, calm but commanding. "You've got this, Clara. Keep moving." Hours or maybe minutes. Time blurred in the chaos, the storm raged. They worked without pause, their movements synchronized, each action reinforcing a bond that neither had fully acknowledged until now. Finally, as night began to fall and the rain eased to a drizzle, they guided the last of the cattle safely back to the ranch. Breathless and soaked through, they dismounted, laughing in relief and exhaustion. Clara wiped rain from her eyes, looking at Jack. His face was smeared with mud, his coat clinging to him, but his eyes shone with pride. "I didn't think we'd get them all," she admitted, shaking her head. Jack chuckled, brushing a hand across his soaked hair. "Neither did I, but you were incredible out there." His gaze held hers longer than necessary, the storm forgotten. "I'm glad you were with me, Clara. I don't think I could have done it alone." For the first time in years, Clara felt seen, not for her family's narrow expectations, not for what she lacked, but for her courage, skill, and heart. The storm had tested them, challenged them, and in surviving it, something had shifted. Trust had been forged in mud, rain, and thunder. And something deeper, a fragile, thrilling bond had begun to grow as the first stars peeked through the clearing clouds. Clara and Jack stood side by side, looking over the wet, shimmering plains. The storm had passed, leaving the world raw and alive. And in that moment, Clara realized, this was the life she had been waiting for. Dangerous, demanding, and full of possibility. The prairie mornings had begun to take on a gentler rhythm. Clara woke to the scent of dew on dry grass, the low hum of insects, and the distant lowing of cattle. Days on the ranch with Jack Callahan had become both routine and extraordinary, filled with work, laughter, and small moments that made her heart flutter in ways she hadn't felt in years. They worked together seamlessly, their movements around the herd and the homestead choreographed by necessity but touched by unspoken familiarity. Jack had shown her how to mend fences more efficiently, read the clouds for incoming weather, and even care for the horses with a gentleness that belied his rugged exterior. Clara, in turn, had proven herself capable, brave and quick-witted, earning Jack's admiration in ways that sometimes made her blush without reason. That afternoon, Jack had sent Dusty and his own horse to the stable to rest, leaving the two of them walking along the ridge to inspect the newly repaired fence line. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold, and the wind carried a warm, gentle breath across the open plains. "Clara," Jack said suddenly, his voice low and hesitant, "can I ask you something?" Clara glanced at him, sensing the gravity behind his tone. "Of course." He stopped walking and turned toward her, his hat in his hand now, shadowing the weariness and hope in his eyes. Why stay here, with me? I know your family, they've never been kind, and I know you've been told you're not enough." His words faltered slightly, as if admitting vulnerability was as risky as riding into a stampede. Clara felt the familiar sting of her family's judgment, but it no longer carried the power it once had. Instead, she met Jack's gaze steadily. "I stay because of you," she said. "Not for the land, not for the work. For you, because you see me for who I am. You don't care what I can't give, or what my family says. You see me." Jack's lips parted, surprise and something gentler mingling in his eyes. I've never met anyone like you, Clara. You're strong, smart, fearless, and yet, you carry this heart that doesn't just survive, you dares to hope. That's what drew me in." Clara's breath hitched, her chest tightening as she realized the depth of her feelings. For years, she had thought love was impossible for her, that she would always be defined by what she could not give. And yet, here was a man, weathered and scarred by his own losses, valuing her for her courage, her loyalty, her very soul. I was afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Afraid I'd never be wanted for me. Afraid that my past, my family, it would always define me." Jack reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. His fingers lingered, gentle but grounding. "Clara, your past doesn't define you. Neither does what anyone else says. You're alive. You fight. You care. You make a difference. And right now, you make me want to be a better man. That's all that matters." A shiver ran through Clara, not from the wind, but from the intensity of the moment. The plains stretched endlessly around them, silent witnesses to a bond that had been tested by storms, cattle, and hardship, now blossoming into something deeper. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, Jack took her hand in his. It was rough and calloused, yet warm and reassuring. Clara squeezed back, the connection electric. The unspoken understanding of shared trust and mutual respect uniting them. I never thought I'd feel this way again, Jack murmured. After losing my wife, I thought I'd be alone forever, but you've changed everything. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from relief and hope. And I never thought I'd be seen, she said softly, not as barren, not as less than, but as enough, just as I am. Jack drew her closer, the wind tugging at their coats, the horizon glowing behind them like a promise. Enough, he repeated. You've always been enough, Clara, and you always will be. The sun dipped below the ridge, leaving the sky awash in purples and deep blues. For the first time in their lives, both of them allowed themselves to hope not for perfection, not for easy days, but for a partnership forged in courage, respect, and love. And as the stars began to emerge, the prairie around them whispered in the wind, carrying with it a quiet truth, that even in a land so wild and unforgiving, hearts brave enough to trust could find a home. The prairie was alive with the gentle hum of morning. Mist clung to the tall grasses, and the lowing of cattle echoed across the sun-drenched plains. Clara stood on the porch of Jack Callahan's ranch, the wind tugging lightly at her hair. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of labor, storms, and quiet moments, each one forging a bond between her and Jack that neither could deny. Her family had finally come to understand, in their own begrudging way, that Clara's worth could not be measured by their narrow expectations. Some had visited the ranch, witnessing her strength, her courage, and the partnership she shared with Jack. They had seen her for herself, and though pride still fought with their old prejudices, the word barren no longer held the power it once had. Jack approached from the barn, Dusty trotting beside him. His hat was tilted back, revealing a face weary from work but radiant with something soft for contentment, hope, and a quiet joy. He stopped beside Clara, their eyes meeting with the easy understanding of people who had faced trials together and emerged stronger. "Morning," he said, voice rough but warm. "Ready to check the east pasture?" Clara smiled, swinging her leg over Dusty's back. "Always," she said. "I think we've got a herd that knows better than to wander these days." They rode together, moving across the golden waves of the prairie with practiced ease. Dusty and Jack's horse moved in rhythm, as if echoing the harmony between the riders. The sun climbed higher, bathing the landscape in a warm glow. And the troubles of the past, the storms, the rustlers, the harsh judgments of family felt like distant shadows. Clara felt a hand brush hers as they rode side by side. She looked at Jack, and in his eyes, she saw the reflection of her own journey, resilience, courage, and the quiet triumph of being valued for exactly who she was. She squeezed his hand lightly, a silent acknowledgement of their shared bond. The fence lines were intact, the cattle grazing calmly, and the ranch seemed to breathe with newfound ease. Clara took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of earth, grass, and the faint aroma of smoke from the kitchen fire wafting from the cabin. Life on the prairie was harsh and demanding, but it was honest, and it rewarded those willing to meet it head-on. "Jack," Clara said, her voice soft but certain, "I never thought I'd feel at home anywhere, but here, with you, I do." Jack's eyes softened, his jaw relaxing as he responded, "Clara, you've made this place a home for both of us. Not just the land, not just the ranch, but for us, you're the heart of it." The words settled over her, like the sun's warmth, melting away years of self-doubt and fear. Clara realized that being wanted, truly seen, and loved for herself was not a dream, it was her reality, and the future, uncertain as it always would be on the frontier, suddenly seemed full of promise as they rounded the last of the cattle and headed back to the ranch. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, golden and alive. It was a world that demanded courage, honesty, and hard work, and Clara had learned that she possessed all three. But more than that, she had found someone who saw her, who trusted her, and who walked beside her through both storms and sunrises. Back at the cabin, they dismounted, brushing mud from their boots and sharing a quiet laugh at Dusty's stubborn refusal to stand still. Jack took Clara's hand again, the gesture no longer hesitant but confident, as if claiming the partnership they had both fought to build. "Ready for the next chapter?" he asked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Clara nodded, feeling a surge of excitement and calm all at once. "I am, with you." And as the sun rose higher, spilling light across the ranch, the past was left behind, the judgment, the storms, the loneliness, and a new beginning emerged. On the vast, untamed plains of the West, Clara and Jack faced the future together, stronger for the trials they had endured, bound by trust, courage, and and a love forged in the wild heart of the frontier. Here, in the open land that stretched endlessly in every direction, they had found not just a home, but each other. And for Clara, that was more than enough.